discovering the game Monopoly, I was absolutely mesmerised by that game and didn't understand anything about property investment or didn't understand, the whole concept of property portfolios. That's sort of what I'm doing in real life now.
This is Property Investory, where we talk to successful property investors to find out more about their stories, mindset, and strategies. I'm Ciarma, and in this episode, we're speaking with property developer Danny Ciarma, founder of award-winning company Urban DC and a 20-year veteran of the property industry. Follow his journey from the family farm to the city of Melbourne, from architect to developer, all the way to becoming one of Australia's most innovative developers from just a $2,000 loan. If you were to meet Ciarma today, based on his accomplishments, you might think he has always been a successful property entrepreneur, someone who started at the top and kept going. But in reality, it's his experience of various roles within the property world that give him an edge.
I've been developing some, medium to high density residential buildings for around 20 years now. Started out as a registered architect, but pretty quickly moved into project management and development management, and then became a developer very early in my career. In the last 15 years, I've completed over, say, 20 development projects, and currently with Urban DC, I've got two projects under construction. One in 308 Carlisle Street, Balaclava, which is 38 apartments over retail. I've got one under construction in Rozelle in Sydney, which is 22 high-end apartments, and I'm about to market a project I've got in Caulfield, which consists of 18 large owner-occupier apartments. And I've got a further two projects in planning at the moment in Sydney. One's in Rose Bay and the other's in Bondi Junction. And just completed a building in Brighton, which is 26 high-end owner-occupier apartments called Oscar Brighton. And only a couple of weeks ago, that building won the Bayside Council Design Excellence Awards for medium density housing. So that's a nice accolade to have.
The development industry never stays still, and neither does Ciarma. No 2 days are ever the same.
I've got several projects on the go, so I'm constantly rotating from one project to the other. And depending on the phase a particular project is in, that will determine how much I spend on one project. I might spend 3/4 of a day focusing on one element of a project and then, 10 minutes on another one and so forth. So, it's just whatever's required. So, I might be going to a planning meeting, talking about all the issues surrounding about that for our submission. Then I might move on to a marketing meeting to talk about the brand mark for the project and marketing material. Might go to a site meeting and talk to the builder about how the progress is going on site, visit sites whilst I'm doing my due diligence. And there's a lot of desk work too, undertaking feasibility studies, talking to valuers, talking to bankers, right through to marking up plans with a red pen, which I often do, send it back to the architect, and the list goes on. So, it's just, rotating through all those elements that's required in order to keep the projects going.
Growing up, Ciarma's career dreams didn't seem to fit his country's surroundings.
So I grew up in Kilmore, country Victoria. My dad was trained horses and harness racing. So I grew up on the farm with lots of animals and horses, and I've spent most of my childhood either sitting on a sulky behind a horse or at the races.
But family experiences can be the most powerful of influences.
I went to a school in the country, but from an early age, I always wanted to be an architect. So, from as early as I could remember, I loved drawing and sort of loved property. My dad, prior to training horses, was a a builder developer. So he built spec homes and apartment buildings. And, from an early age, I was always on building sites and, can still remember the smell of sawn timber, when the framing material was going up. And I remember, playing around in the garage and, at the age of 8 and looking at all the architectural plans, all the documentation that Dad had for all these building projects. And I was just mesmerised by it, and that was back in the days when it was all hand-drawn.
Ciarma's beginnings in the property world prove that inspiration can come from the simplest of places.
I just knew then I want to do this, I want to be an architect. So, I always had a flair for it and always knew what I wanted to do, and which was good for me because it gave me a lot of focus whilst I was at school, had something to work towards. And in terms of property itself, even I remember at that stage discovering the game Monopoly, I was absolutely mesmerised by that game and didn't understand anything about property investment or didn't understand, the whole concept of property portfolio, but I just loved that game and the idea of buying multiple properties and working your way up to, building hotels on your sites. It was just amazing. And, and that's sort of what I'm doing in real life now.
Like many students, Ciarma learnt more about hard work outside university than in it.
I went straight to uni. It was a 5-year course, so it's a long course. And I did the last year over 2 years because I wanted to work. I just couldn't wait to get out there. So I worked in an architectural practice whilst I was studying part-time for the last 2 years. So no, straight into it. I did the odd job whilst I was going through uni to help put myself through. I did everything from, kitchen hand, chef, cook at KFC. I was a waiter, a barman, I steam cleaned carpets. I did all of that. But, professionally, I went straight into architecture.
Ciarma's path from entry-level architect to powerhouse property developer certainly wasn't straightforward. However, he says every challenging experience was really preparation in disguise. I
was in it for about 2 to 3 years. You have to do a 2-year period to fill out a logbook and become registered. I wanted to become registered. I'd come so far, I wanted to be able to say I can call myself an architect. So I did that, and probably after about 3 years, I got into project management at Village Roadshow, and that was a great experience because you got to see so many different facets of a building process. Not only did we manage the fit-out contractor, we also managed the relationship with the landlord, because it was always in, like shopping centres. So there was a lot of lessor-lessee type relationships that had to be managed, and then over and above that, we had our own contractors, our FF&E or fit-out contractors, the carpet, the curtains, the seating, projections. So there was a whole heap of things that had to be managed. So you really, it was a great training ground to sharpen your skills in project management. Look, testing my memory now, but probably 5 or 6 years. Yeah, 5 or 6 years I got sent over to Geneva to develop the first multiplex in Switzerland for Village Roadshow. So I did that. And then when I got back, I knew I wanted to move into development. And that's when I got a job at Docklands Authority as development director, which was a really good springboard into the development industry.
In fact, without all his lived experiences and his training opportunities, Ciarma knows he wouldn't be the developer he is today.
It's a funny thing, a lot of people jump into property development. Would you jump into into a surgery, and operate on someone if you didn't train as a doctor? You know what I mean? So it's people seem to think that anyone can do it, but it takes a lot of time and years of experience to get it right.
Reflecting on his own journey, Ciarma realises there isn't one path to property development. If there is one essential quality or requirement, it might be the opportunity to just practice your skills.
I think now, back in my day, there was never really a property development course at uni. I think now there may be. There was always project management courses, and they were even sort of quite new, even back then. I'm talking, 20, 25 years ago. Look, people come into the industry from many different avenues. There's architects that become developers, there's quantity surveyors, there's builders, there's there's all types of people that enter the field, and everyone has their own journey and experience. The probably easiest thing to do is get a job with a developer and learn project management skills, start off as a junior sort of assistant project manager and work your way up to development manager. That's what I would recommend. Even when I was doing architecture or working as a young project manager at Village Roadshow, I was always buying apartments and houses and renovating them, and I always did that on the side. So you sharpen your skills bit by bit, sort of outside of the workforce as well.
Ciarma knows that the best thing of learning is hands-on, and he's reaped the rewards of collaboration in his own professional life.
Prior to Urban DC, which I started about 5 years ago, I was in partnership in a company called Urban Inc. So we had that for about 7 or 8 years, and that was in my own right with another partner. And, we did lots of projects there as well. And prior to that, what really gave me sort of the head start was I entered into a partnership with a well-known developer at the time called Morris Schwartz, who invited me in as a partner in a company called Pan Urban, and that was probably around about 20 years ago actually, and I was managing director of Pan Urban and took a partner there, and that was a really good entree into property development because I had an older mentor that sort of taught me the ropes and or helped me sharpen my skills, and I moved on from there. So I have been doing it for about 20 years, but in different phases with partnerships with people.
Building upon years of experience as a developer, Ciarma now feels confident to manage his projects alone, giving him the freedom to be flexible. However, he knows going solo is a unique skill.
You don't have to check with your partner, decisions you're making. Are you happy with that? Yeah, and each partner are equal. You're always checking with each other, and you're pretty much always on the same page. But you run your own race. You run your own race. Sometimes you need partners because sometimes if you may not have the overall rounded experience, you might be stronger in one aspect of development and your partner might be better in another. There's lots of people that come together where someone might have great financing skills, knows how to, arrange capital or raise capital, and then he might get into partnership with someone that understands construction, and has a building background, and those two sort of complement each other. So it just depends on your own. I tend to have a well-rounded balance, of experience amongst all facets of the industry. So I'm okay to go it alone. 1 minute you've got your design hat on, marking up plans. The next minute you're looking at a feasibility, trying to work out a cash flow and the internal rate of return. And then the next minute you're talking to the lawyer about an agreement. Next minute you're talking to a builder about, construction techniques and types of materials. So you need to know, a little bit about everything.
Ciarma's first property purchase was anything but conventional, and hilariously much more than money was at stake.
Funny story, my wife likes hearing this story and she reminds me about it a lot. So when I was about 26, 1998, around about there, look, I always wanted to buy a property. I just started working and never really had much money. I read a book called Building Wealth Through Investment Property by Jan Summers. That was a life-changing book for me. I loved that book and I've still got it on my bookcase and always referred to it. And some of the things in that book were about, buying multiple properties and sitting on them and, watching them go up in value and then drawing against them and all of that. So I wanted to do that, but I just didn't have the money. And I was only sort of a couple of years into, a lowly paid sort of graduate architect's job. Barely had money to sort of pay for the car and the rent every week. So I started going out. At that time, I started going out with my now wife, Michelle. And I recall taking her out to, auctions and open for inspections on weekends. I just can't believe she put up with it, but she did, which was good. And anyway, eventually found a great little one-bedroom apartment in South Ciarma. brown brick building, punt road, noisy street. It was probably at the cheaper range of what I could afford. And I purchased it. And, back then there were like any number of one-bedroom apartments around South Yarra, Paran, for between $90,000 and $100,000. And that was at the time when RAMS and Aussie Home Loans were lending 95% LVR on your mortgages. So I bought one. I found one, and it was $95,000. I needed $9,500 to complete the transaction. Right? Problem was I only had $4,000 in the bank. So I sheepishly asked Michelle, my girlfriend at the time, for a loan, and without question, she lent me $2,000. And then I drew out cash from my credit card for the balance and scraped it all together and got the $9,500 and settled the property. Problem I had was I was getting paid on a monthly basis, and I had 3 weeks to go before my next paycheck. So I had to go and get a personal loan for $5,000. Back then, I don't know if they do it now, but back then they processed those loans pretty quickly. Got a $5,000 loan, paid back Michelle within 2 to 3 weeks, and lived off the rest until, from paycheck to paycheck, and slowly paid off my loan and the credit card. So that's how I got into property.
Thankfully, his relationship was built on strong foundations, and as it turns out, so was that very first investment, even if it was hard going along the way.
The good thing back then was those apartments were returning 7% yield, and interest rates were 7%. So it was cash flow neutral. I rented it out for a year, and then got on top of things a bit more financially, and was able to move in. And I spent about $5,000 on, I laid floorboards myself, and Michelle and I painted the walls. And a couple of years after that, we needed to sell. As I mentioned before, we moved on to bigger apartments and bought a little house and needed to sell. And, probably 2 to 3 years later, I sold for $178,000. So, I made $70,000 clear. And that was an amazing feeling, to sort of turn over a property and end up with $70,000 in the bank. So that's that sort of left a big impact on me, and thought, I want more of this. I want to keep doing this. So it's been stepping stones along the way. So I did that, and not long after I bought my property, Michelle bought a 2-bedroom apartment in Paran, which we lived in when we got married. She paid $150 for that, and when we sold it, about 4 years later for $350. So we sold as we went in order to cash up to buy our modest first home. So it was stepping stones along the way. And I look back now and go, oh geez, if I had held those properties, they'd be worth a lot more. But at the time, you feel as if you don't want to sort of take on too much debt, and you feel like you need to sort of free it up and sort of convert it into different properties as you go.
Like any effective strategy, the rewards from Ciarma's first purchase were a sign of future possibilities in the world of property investment. The confidence in his long-term strategy was validated.
And I think that was a nice validation moment that, this works. So I guess, in that respect, yes. It's those aha moments sort of are built up over time, many different experiences, I think. There was one moment which I can recall, which is more about property development. When I was at uni in my architecture course, we were in a class called feasibility studies, and it was at the time when I really just sort of loved design, the built form, architecture. Didn't really sort of know at that point in time that I wanted to, be a developer as such. It was more about being an architect. And the lecturer put on the board a feasibility where, he explained to us how you can calculate the gross floor area of a building, and apply a building rate against that, and then you work out an efficiency, and then you apply a sales rate against the sales net sellable area, and then you build up a feasibility, and you work out a profit. Right? And that was an aha moment for me, because what that taught me was how to monetize my love for the built form. All right, so it was the economics behind property. So that was the moment, I think, was the crossroads where I knew, I get it now. This is how you make money out of property. Because prior to that, it was all about how do you create a beautiful building? What do human beings want? What amenity do they need? The built environment, the built form, all about that. And then all of a sudden was like, this is the economics behind it. That was probably the aha moment for me.
From his earliest development roles, he has been focusing on a niche that he is passionate about, and that sells.
In Urbanic, we targeted the investment market, and that was probably a function of the timing of that market. The investment market was very strong, and the Urbanic model was to develop smaller sort of investment-driven apartments that were delivered to the market at an affordable price point, but dressed up to look really good. Design was always important to us, so our buildings always looked spectacular, and they were always built well. And that was our market, and we used to sell through investment groups, and some were offshore sales as well. When I started Urban Inc., I really focused on doing smaller boutique buildings that were targeted towards the owner-occupiers, and better, more higher-end buildings. And that's what every building that I've done so far within Urban DC is within that sort of those parameters. So I just get more pleasure out of designing a large 3-bedroom or a large 2-bedroom apartment that has really nice, spacious rooms, better finishes, just better environments for people to live in, rather than targeting the smaller apartments for the young students. So that's the Urban DC model. That's owner-occupier product on infill sites in established suburbs.
While it might seem like the rise of owner-occupiers is a recent trend, Ciarma says it's actually not as new as we think. In fact, it makes sense according to market conditions.
There's no doubt that that market segment is stronger, and there's no doubt that the investment market has become weaker, and it's not as strong as it used to be. So that's one driver. But look, I think that market's always been there. I think, when I was with Pan Urban, we developed 401 St Kilda Road, which was very, very high end, and it was one of the first wave of owner-occupier buildings. And at the time, there were several being built. It was around about 2007, and that was the first wave. The very first was the Melburnian, which was a cycle, a property cycle before that. But in 2007, there was Lucient, 1 Clarendon Street, 401 St Kilda Road. There were a few projects that were targeting those owner-occupiers. And I think that was probably the first time the baby boomers really started to sort of start that journey of downsizing. Since then, I think it's always been there. And I just think what's happened is the population growth and immigrants coming in and Asian students and just population growth in general has created a demand for investment-driven stock. So a lot of the developers focused on that. But even during that period of time, I still think there was a demand for owner-occupier stock, and I think that's going to continue. I think that's an upward trend, particularly as the younger generations come through. I think the baby boomers are the first cab off the rank that sort of experienced this, this apartment living. I think the likes of you and me and generations even before us, it just becomes more commonplace. It just becomes a common thing that, I'll sell my house and I'll move into an apartment. So I think that market's going to get stronger.
Even 20-year players like Ciarma don't always get it right, especially when the very pressures of like wreak havoc on our long-term mindset. According to him, the best thing we can do is just move forward and keep going.
I've had projects that have been good projects. I've had projects that have been great projects. They've all been good on a level. And I've always sort of tended to make money out of property and never lost it. Look, the only way I could really answer that question is to say that my biggest regret is selling some of the properties that I have. I've sold properties along the way, and I look back now and I know they've tripled in value, and I know at the time I probably could have held on to them, but I just thought, oh yeah, it's run its race, I'll sell it and move on. So my regret is actually selling and not holding. But, I guess as time goes on, you sort of realise sometimes you need to retire some debt, free up some capital in order to move into something else, which was, what I did, but I regret it.
Coming up after the break, we'll talk about Ciarma's tips for new investors.
The way to overcome it is to not strive to have the luxury home in Rose Bay for your first house, right? Or Toorak or whatever it is. You need to start small and build it up.
As well as some important development discernment.
First and foremost is you need to find the right suburbs and the right locations that have a catchment of downsizers that have the ability to sell their home and move into that location or move within that location.
And that's next. I'm Tyron Shum and you're listening to Property Investory. Hey, let's be real. Deals that can yield 20 to 30% per annum do exist. Don't believe me? Well, here's a story about property development I invested in Victoria. This developer had the project fully funded beforehand, but he and his family suffered a loss, a circumstance that led him to be unable to proceed with the development. So I stepped in, and in 2 weeks we funded the shortfall, allowing for the development to continue. 5 months later, the development was refinanced and we received our funds back with interest. Yes, there are amazing opportunities in the property market like this one. So, do you want to get a better return with low risk on your money? Then register your interest by visiting propertyinvestory.com. With the benefit of hindsight, Ciarma now understands there's no better strategy than hard work.
People have high expectations today. I think you need to. The way to overcome it is to not strive to have the luxury home in Rose Bay for your first house, right? Or Toorak or whatever it is. You need to start small and build it up. There's no get rich quick schemes. There's no magic bullet, so to speak. It's hard work and it's time. Right? It's, people say, oh, we need to time the market. No, it's not timing the market, it's time in the market, right? So, sometimes you have to sacrifice where you would like to live and the type of house you'd like to live in. You might have to move out of town, out of the city, to a cheaper location and build and buy a cheaper property that may need some work. I was always lucky because I was always able to turn my hand to renovating. Not everyone is like that. And I always found, the unpolished diamond or the ugly duckling in the street that was cheaper than all the other buildings and was able to sort of value add it. So the only way I can suggest is that you just have to start within your means and build it up. What people need to understand is that if you buy one little house or a little apartment, as time goes on and if the values keep rising, which over time, I believe they do. You end up with free equity in there, and that allows you to free that up and buy something bigger. And then as time goes on, you end up with more free equity and then you just move on. And that's how you do it,
In terms of property development, location still rings true if you're developing a single set of units or entire apartment complexes.
It's really just understanding the right locations. Because what happens is, and that's slowly changing as this type of owner-occupier product becomes more and more prevalent. But there's only, if you develop a 3-bedroom apartment, let's say it's 140 square metres, right? And I'm talking sort of Melbourne terms now. Sydney, it's different again. That could be anywhere between 10,000 a square metre to 15,000 a square metre, right? In Sydney, it could be, 15 to 30, right, depending on where you are. So that's quite a big price point. So if you're talking Melbourne, for instance, you can't expect to go to a suburb where the median house price is 700,000, 800,000, and build a 3-bedroom apartment where you have to get at least 10 a metre or 9 a metre to make it stack up. And therefore you're selling it for 1.4 million or 1.3 million. It's just not going to work because it's all about price parity. And that's why you find owner-occupier apartments tend to spring up in the sort of more affluent blue chip type suburbs, where, the price parity is such that, the downsizers might have a house worth 3 million. They can sell that and afford an apartment for 1.5 or 1.6 or whatever, 2 million. And that changes depending on the suburb. If the suburb has a median price, like, if you're in Point Piper and the median is whatever it is, I don't know what it is, 5 million or 10 million, whatever the median is, you can afford a more expensive apartment. And that all comes down to, that distills down to the land price, right? Because and that's the economics of it. So first and foremost is you need to find the right suburbs and the right locations that have a catchment of downsizers that have the ability to sell their home and move into that location or move within that location. Because most people want to be close by. They don't want to move too far from where they've raised their children. So that's number one, and then obviously it's all the other things that go with it. It's choosing the right apartment design, the right floor plan, the right look of the building, the amenity within the apartment, the appliances, the finishes, all of that.
When it all comes down to the final sale, Ciarma says it's crucial to know how the market is performing. You don't have to do it yourself. Agents can sometimes be a developer's best friend.
The apartments it's market driven. So, you talk to several agents or, one or two trusted agents and you get a feel for what that market is. And when you're in the groove, you sort of know, you know that, and it, when the market's rising, it's always inching up and you say, oh, geez, that project, down the road by that developer, reached 12,000 a metre in Melbourne. Oh, shoot, really? That's amazing. And then, 2 months go by and says, oh, guess what? Around the corner, they're getting 13, And you sort of get a feel for the market. And, sometimes when it's being pushed too much. And so, you always talk to agents, you get an average of what they're saying, you put it into your FISO and hopefully you get more by the time you're ready to sell because you've spec'd it up and and the product is a nice product and you've done a beautiful design and the location's good and hopefully the market accepts that and sees what you see and, what you saw in it and you get the top dollar. It's not a function of this is my cost, so there I've got to add, 20% margin on it. And this is what I need to get. That's what happens sometimes. Some developers do that, but I think that's a bit fake. You've got to start from the values and know what the market is and then work backwards and hope that you and work it in such a way where, you hope to get a margin.
Ciarma feels lucky he hasn't experienced a situation where the market has turned mid-development. But it's not just luck. He says learning from the mistakes of others can help safeguard your future returns.
There's been, many instances that I know of where sites have come back onto the market. They've stalled. Developers have made assessments. More often than not, it's not the market that's turned. They've made the wrong assumptions. They've bought a site where they, it's $10,000 a square metre every day of the week, and they've probably thought that they can get 12. And then, they've gone through the whole planning permit. They've spent a heap of money on it, on the marketing, the whole thing. And then all the agents are saying, no, we can't get you 12, it's 10, or we might push to 11, but that's as far as we can go. And the project doesn't stack up. And a lot of those instances you see, there's those sites hit the market again. They're sold with a permit. Now, sometimes it's because the market's risen, a lot. The developers are trying to cash in and thought, why should I go through all the pain and risk of developing when I can make a nice little profit by just selling the land. That happens, but that's not always the case. Sometimes they're selling it because they can't make it work. And the agents are throwing ridiculous prices on the land because they're trying to recoup all what they paid, plus the stamp duty, plus their interest, plus their planning costs, their marketing costs. They're trying to recoup all that back and load it onto the land price, and it doesn't stack up. Then you look at it and you just know, you go, this is a ridiculous price. It's not going to work.
We all know the way the world treats home, work and leisure is changing. By his own assessment, Ciarma thinks our capital cities will be leading the way and investors should act accordingly.
I do think that we will become more and more like New York. I think, I develop in both Melbourne and Sydney, and I feel Melbourne seems to be more ahead of the curve than Sydney in terms of creating product and design. It's not an argument of who's better, right? It's just I just feel Melbourne is a tougher market, and I don't know. It just feels like it's ahead of the curve. I feel both, within Australia, the Eastern Seaboard will become more and more like New York in terms of service-related type buildings, mixture of hotel rooms within apartment buildings, concierge. It's more service related, I think, as time goes on. I think that's where people are going generally. People want more time to spend either working to make the money to pay for the services or relaxing and, having their ironing done for them, having the cleaner, having someone who opens the front door when they walk in, having someone who washes their car. I just think there's going to be more of that, more overlaid, not just an apartment building with a front door. There's going to be services added into it. I feel that's where I see it happening. As the market becomes more mature and sophisticated, I see that happening.
When thinking about the rise of city living, Ciarma says look no further than Melbourne's very own recent transformation.
Everything goes through cycles. The cities are getting more and more populated ever since, say, Melbourne, for instance, postcode 3000 came about. I can't remember when that was, early 90s, where, back then it was just office buildings and retail. And the city was dead at night. Come 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, it was like a ghost town. And the council turned that around and, wanted to induce more development in the city, and have a look at it. It's booming. So it now becomes a 24/7 city. The workers go away during the day, but the people come home into their apartments at night. So it's 24/7. And that helps the retail, and it makes it more safer and lively, And I just think that will continue to happen. Suburbs are always pegged to distance to the CBD, aren't they? The good ones are always sort of closer and accessible. Generally, the people who have money to buy those apartments, generally work in the city or close to, generally have the high-paying jobs to be able to support that purchase, or are semi-retired anyway, or fully retired but still want to be close by. There's no coincidence that, all the nice suburbs in all the cities are close to the city. You get the odd ones that are out further out. You get those pockets, but generally speaking, it's like a shockwave effect. The closer in, the more valuable your suburb is, and as it goes out. So I think it's just a function of that. It's not about me wanting to be in the CBD or developing close to the CBD. It's just choosing those suburbs that are sought after, that have the demographic. They just tend to be near the CBD.
In terms of personal habits that have aided him in attaining success, both in life and in property, Ciarma's work ethic stands out.
Apart from just sort of training myself to have to know every element of the process so that nothing comes undone, I would sort of say my biggest trait is that I'm relentless. It sounds a bit OCD, but, I make sure that by the end of every day, there's not one email that's come into my inbox that I haven't either actioned or read and understood. I can't sleep at night knowing that I get bombarded by all these emails, and I can't sleep at night knowing that I haven't read them, or there's something urgent that needed actioning and I haven't done it. So I always clean up my inbox. And I was like that in the early days when we didn't have email. I used to always make sure my in tray was empty before I left the office. And I used to see other project managers around me, my peers, they would just be floundering. You'd see their inbox just overflowing, and they weren't performing, and they were just getting clogged down. So what I do is I clear the day, right? Sure, there's always a little bit of unfinished business, but I clear the day, and what that allows me to do is jump on the front foot the next day and start chasing people up on emails I'd sent the day before, or actioning new items. So it allows you to move forward. If you don't do that, you just get clogged up and you won't get results, and you start spinning around and doing donuts. So that's probably my trait.
Despite the personal qualities that have contributed to his own success, Ciarma feels as if drawing on the special skills of others, even though through osmosis, is just as important.
What happens is you tend to hang around like-minded people. So my mentors are my peers, and some are older, more experienced, some are younger, more energetic, So you tend to, it's like anything, if you're interested in classic cars, you hang around people who have classic cars. Or if you're interested in, being healthy and sporty, you sort of hang around gymnasiums and talk to people, about fitness. So you tend to sort of, throughout my career, all my friends are in the same industry. I've got friends outside of the industry, but my colleagues and close friends that I deal with every day are in the industry. You're always swapping notes. You're always bouncing off each other. And some of them are older and they've walked the walk long before you did, and give you, share their experiences. And so it's not like one sort of old hand that sort of I call on a daily basis. How do I do this? It's not like that. It's just a group of different people that you talk to, on a weekly basis.
Ciarma is constantly working on himself, filling his mind with knowledge to draw from when it really counts.
It really is about mindset. And so I'm very proud of my library. I've got, just about every book that's been written out there about wealth and strategies and mindsets and, think and grow rich and all those types of books. I've read them, and you need to. And I don't believe that every strategy in every book is right and that you should just follow every strategy, but it's just building up a compendium in your mind and building up that mindset. It's just constantly thinking about it, and just getting confident in knowing by reading so many books. I mean, if you're well read, you're generally good at something. So by reading so many of those books, you start to think like that, and that's very important.
Depending on your stage of life and your investing experience, Ciarma believes that the same material might even provide different lessons.
I mean, I don't read those books now, but I did in the early days, and I've still got them. I've never thrown them away. But when you're young and you're starting out, you do need to sort of read those books because, you pick up little ideas here and there throughout multiple books. But it's not only about the ideas. I mentioned Jan Summers' book because that was about strategy and idea. Right. But the other thing about that book was it sets the scene on, society, where you sit today and what's in store for you if you're, working a 9-to-5 job and, what are you going to have when you retire? Well, you're not really going to have much except the pension to look forward to. Right. And that really set the scene, and that was really profound for me because it sort of explains really well the reasons why you need to build wealth, and, property investment is one vehicle to achieve that. But all the other books about, just how to think and what the millionaires think like, and, what are their traits, and, it's important.
Ciarma has kindly shared with us some of the books he has found most inspiring.
A heap of books. There's one book that I like, and it's, what I did was I started reading books about, how to build capital and how to create capital, and then I started reading books about capital itself and money and just mindsets of people. You start to sort of morph into different books. There's one called, which I loved, called The Mystery of Capital, by, I hope I say it correctly, or pronounce it correctly, Hernando de Soto. That was a great book because what it talks about was, the mysterious capital. Why are some countries wealthy and others not? And why do countries like Africa that have so much wealth under their ground within the land, why are they poor? Whereas other countries are wealthy. And there's a lot of things spoken about in this book, but one of the overriding things that I took away from it was the legal system, the Westminster, the British Western world legal system that allows people to unlock the value of their land by way of the titling system. And when you think about it, that's very true. Where you've got countries that have a legal system that allows you to own freehold title, what you're really doing is you're unlocking the wealth in the land that sits below you. I'm not talking about mineral wealth and coal and gas. I'm talking about owning your own property. Whereas in countries like Africa and other countries where they don't really have a strong land rights system, it's all about, land that's been brought down from generation to generation, and and some generations lose it, and it's all leasehold, and it's not. You don't have that sort of right to it, and that's important. So that was an interesting book. So there's, I just read lots of books that sort of, have different angles on capital and property and thinking, thinking rich. Like there's another one called Your Money or Your Life, transforming your relationship with money and achieving financial independence. So there's a whole range of books like that just sort of get you into the mindset. Another one, How to Think Like a Millionaire, I've read them all. So there's another one, The Richest Man in Babylon. That's a famous book. Right, I love that book, and I just remembered that one. That's another good book, and it's all about just putting aside your savings, and building it up.
So, what's next for Danny Ciarma? Even having already achieved so much and with many accolades to his name.
I'm excited about just keep doing what I'm doing. I love the process, and I love seeing the finished product. I'm always excited about that next site, what's that next site going to be? What's that next building going to look like? What I really love doing is, identifying a site and working out what's the right product to put on it, coming up with an apartment plan, a spec, a colour scheme, working together with the architect, but and then, being satisfied with it. But what I really love seeing is that purchasers come, to the display suite at the sales stage and fall in love with that vision. That's what's priceless. When you create something from your mind and you put it all on paper, and purchasers come along and absolutely fall in love with that vision, So that's what I enjoy.
Thank you to Danny Ciarma, our guest on this episode of Property Investory. If you love the show, perhaps you're now ready to invest your money in a low-risk, high-return deal. If you are, then SMS me your name and email address on 04 99 88 10 40 to become a lender. There are amazing opportunities in the property market right now, and I'm looking for lenders who want to invest their money for as short as 6 months. What are you waiting for? Don't let your money just sit in the bank. To register your interest, text me your name and email address on 04 99 88 10 40.